what's interesting is you have the political rhetoric, which is very high at this point, but the economic realities are very severe. And this is particularly true between the U.S. and Europe. Europe doesn't have anywhere to go for its energy. If they don't get the Russian gas, there's no gas that they can get. They can bid up the existing gas supplies that are supplied by LNG, but they're not. It's going to be taking a zero-sum game at this point. It'll take at least 3 to 4 years to increase LNG capacity, even near where Europe needs it. So China has this opportunity, but this question at what cost? Will it put them closer to Europe if they're actually able to broker something between it? But right now, the situation in Russia is that it appears that Putin is going to see what kind of ground game he has before he comes to the table. It's unfortunate, but that seems the reality.
But China also has a relationship with Ukraine. It does have the ear of Ukrainian leaders, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, China is Ukraine's largest trading partner in 2019. It's absolutely strategic to the Belt and Road Initiative. It's one of those things where literally China has been banking on Ukraine for a long period of time, especially as vis-a-vis going to Europe and things like, and other markets in the Middle East, et cetera. So they're not really willing to give it up. The difficulty is that China sees both sides. They've seen the quotes from Biden and the current and Burns, who's the current CIA director back in 2007, where they said, if we keep expanding NATO, it's going to mean war. And they look at that and they kind of scratch their head and say, you knew this was coming. Why did you let it get out of control? On the other hand, it's very difficult for China to endorse any kind of activity where one country is sending troops into another country. It is absolutely sacrosanct, this idea that the internal affairs of countries have to be settled by those countries, not by outside forces. So they're trying to be very rational about this and say both sides have to kind of come together. They understand Russia's desire for security guarantees, especially in the face of an expanding NATO, and a realization by those who are doing it that this was going to lead to a conflict. But on the other hand, there's a lot of feeling for the suffering of the Ukrainian people. China has sent a Red Cross mission donations to the Ukrainian situation. But right now, it's just a no-win situation. Hopefully, China can get involved. But as I said, this could be another impediment to U.S.-China relations.
Neysun, Mahboubi, on Friday, President Biden also announced that he would end Russia's most favored nation trade status, and he banned the import of all Russian vodka, seafood, and diamonds. And as expected, the EU and the G7 nations will follow the U.S. announcement. There are also efforts underway now, we know, to suspend Russia from the WTO. What is the potential fallout for the global economy with these measures?
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that the EU has followed in the U.S.'s lead on these issues, because I do want to suggest, contrary somewhat to my colleague Einar Tangen's earlier point, that reaching out to the EU as somehow a wedge against the U.S. is not really an option for China right now. I think that was a strategy that they were developing and had some runway before this particular crisis, for sure. But I think that it's very important for Chinese official actors to understand that the U.S. and EU are very closely aligned on this particular issue, and trying to kind of separate out the U.S. and EU is not going to be a productive strategy. So I think in terms of the global economy, right now, Russia is turning into a global pariah state. And I think the question is, does China want to be on the side of the U.S. and EU in maintaining global stability outside of this one global pariah state, or does China want to be on the side of the global pariah state? And if it wants to be on that side, obviously, given that China is the second largest economy in the world, it's going to create turbulence in the global economy, which is not going to be good for anybody, including China. So it's really, I think China has a big choice that is before them, and they're not going to be able to get out of it in the way that they may have liked to, given their own priorities from before.
Neysun, why would Chinese involvement be seen as a wedge between the United States and Europe, or as an attempt to create a wedge between the United States and Europe? Surely all sides want to see this resolved.
Well, what I meant by that is just to say that in the tensions with the U.S. That pre-existed this crisis, I think China was making some headway in creating common cause with European countries on economic issues that was sort of an end run around some of the issues they were facing with the U.S. My only point here is just to say that on this particular issue, the Ukraine crisis, the U.S. and the EU are on the same page entirely. There's too much resonance with European history from World War II and World War I with what Russia has done in Ukraine for Europe to view this any way differently than the U.S. does. And so I do think for global stability, for global economic growth, for all of those things, it would be better for China to be on the same page as the U.S. and the EU sooner than later.
Einar, Tangen, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I completely disagree. I mean, if you listen to what I said, the political rhetoric and the emotional side is at odds with the economic realities. Europe does not have another place to go for many of the things, especially when it comes to energy. Food is going to be impacted. So yes, right now there's a tremendous amount of hostility towards Russia, but this idea that you have to be on the right side of history simply by saying that, acknowledging that Russia's incursion into Ukraine is bad, yes, but how about everything before? He did not answer this issue that in 2007, you have two of the people, the president and the head of the CIA, saying, yes, if we go into Ukraine, it's going to cause a war. I mean, the expansion of NATO, they put that out there directly. And, this idea that you can, walk into a situation and say, oh, I see a dead body, I see somebody with a gun, all right, I'm going to assume they murdered them, when in fact what happened was the other way around. It was they were acting in self-defense, or at least that is their perspective. So this jumping on Russia as a way of kind of solving this, that is a no-end situation. All right, if you say you can get rid of Russia completely and Belarus and anybody who's associated with them, that might smack of a lot of emotional. You might feel good about it now, but the realities aren't going to work out. What are you going to do about, places like in the Middle East, who 60% of their wheat is dependent on Russia and Ukraine? I mean, it's almost juvenile in the sense that you can just have these actions and there aren't global repercussions. We've already seen that with the global supply chain. I mean, this idea that you can tug on one part of the twine ball and everything will just work out has not worked out. So I think this kind of idea that you have to be on the right side of history is exactly the wrong side of history.